Hi guys, this is Beginner Music Theory, lesson number 5. We're going to talk about dots and ties. And to do this, we're going to follow musictheory.net's lesson of dots and ties. So let's go ahead and click on that lesson. So the concept of a dot and a tie is actually really simple and pretty easy to understand. So augmentation dots or dots and tenuto ties are two types of symbols that we use to alter a note's duration, to change the note's duration. And usually it is to make it bigger, to make it longer. So we're going to talk about the dot first. So a dot increases the duration of the value that is written next to by 1/2. So what does that mean? So the dot, which is a small circle, you always written to the right of the note head, is going to be adding half of the value of the base note duration. So in this case, this is a dotted quarter note. So in a dotted quarter note, we're going to have the base value of a quarter note, and we're going to add half that to the total. So what is half of a quarter note? If you remember from our note durations video, the eighth note is half of a quarter note. So now, as you can see, a dotted quarter note is equal to a quarter note plus an eighth note. And when we say equal in terms of note durations, we're talking about they take up the same amount of time. So the dotted quarter note can also be broken down into 3/8 notes because, as you can see, a quarter note equals 2/8 notes, and we already know that from our note durations. So quarter note, 2/8 notes, plus another eighth note, 3/8 notes. So a dotted value can always be represented as 3 of the immediately shortest value, or half of the one that is written on. So to be very clear, a dotted quarter, for example, can be written as 3 of the shortest immediate value, which is the eighth note. Right after the quarter note, the eighth note is the shortest value after that, which is half of a quarter note. Okay, so let's talk about ties. Ties, what they do is they add up multiple notes of the same pitch. Now, you may have seen this symbol before, this symbol of the curved line connecting two note heads. Now, you may have seen it as a legato marking or what's called a slur. And even though they're the same symbol, they mean different things. So let's be very clear. So when the tie connects multiple notes of the same pitch, like you can see here, in this case, they're connecting two Fs. It's actually what's called a tie. And what this is doing is adding up these values into a single note. If these two notes were a different pitch, like if this was an F and this was a C up here, for example, it would be considered a slur, and it would be a marking of legato, meaning that they're to be played very connected instead of staccato or rearticulated. So just be really careful. A slur is a symbol of articulation, whereas a tie is actually a symbol of adding the notes together. So slightly different. The symbol's the same, but the idea is very different. Okay. So the reason why we use ties, like we could have written this as a half note instead of two quarter notes, right? Now, if you notice here, there is a bar line written in between them, and that's probably the main reason why ties are used. Ties are used to let the duration of a note travel across a barrier in music. And by barrier, we mean a bar line or something that's splitting up that value. So if you remember the rules of time signatures, we cannot put more time, that is the strict maximum of any time signature. For example, in a 4/4 time signature, we know that the 4 means that the value is a quarter note, and the 4 on top means that we can have 4 quarter notes. Now, here, if we had wanted to write a half note here on the fourth beat of the 4/4, we would have ended up with 5 beats on this first bar and 5 quarter notes specifically. And that is, of course, is not allowed on a 4/4 bar. So to get around that, what we've done here is write a quarter note and a quarter note tied together over the bar line. So that ends up being a half note in value, but notation wise, it allows us to keep the rule that we cannot have more than 4 quarter notes in a single 4/4 bar, right? So just to give you guys an idea, these fourth and fifth notes are combined. And if I were to sing this, if there was no tie, it would sound like this. Ta, 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 ta. But with the tie, now I will keep the click with my clapping, and with my voice, you will see that I'm connecting them into a half note. Ta, 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 ta. So you saw the fourth beat of the first bar and the first beat of the second bar were just continuous. I didn't stop ta through that. One more time. Ta, 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 ta. So basically, if there had been no bar line there, or if we had had a different time signature, we could have written a half note there, like I mentioned before. All right, so let's just take a quick look at this chart of different dotted note values. So the first row here is the dotted half note. So dotted half note is going to be the base value, a half note, plus half of that, which is a quarter note. So total is a half note plus a quarter note. Or, like we mentioned before, 3 of the half value, which is quarter notes. So 3 quarter notes. Next row is the dotted quarter. We already covered this one in the regular lesson. That's a quarter note, the base value, plus half of that, which is an eighth note. Or 3 eighth notes. And lastly, the dotted eighth note, which is the base value of an eighth note plus half of that, which is a 16th note. Or 3 of the half value, which is 3 16th notes. Okay, and as you can see here, you might start to see why dots are important. Because if you remember from our note duration lesson, we didn't really have a way to represent groups of 3 of any given note value. So if you remember, for example, in quarter notes, if we wanted we could write 2 quarter notes as a half note, or 4 quarter notes as a whole note. But we really didn't have a way to write 3 quarter notes until now. So the dotting note allows us the chance to add up groups of 3. Now we could have done this with ties as well, but dotting is a simple way that we can notate this. So we could have written a half note and then tied a quarter note to that, and that would basically be the same thing as a dotted half note. But we have we have 2 different ways to notate that to make it more versatile, more convenient for us to write music. Okay, I hope that was clear. And once again, dots can be a little confusing, especially remembering what the half of the values are. So if you find yourself not being sure, just go back to that chart of the note durations from a few lessons ago, so you can refresh your memory about the different relationships of the note durations. Okay, see you guys in another video. Bye bye.